From the East Texas Sports Network studios, powered by Texas Dairy Queen, a tradition of excellence, the ETSN podcast, where Clint Buckley and Mike Graham offer their, well, they just talk. It's the lowdown on everything high school football in East Texas. And now, Clint Buckley and Mike Graham.
Roughly 40% of the state of Texas will be done playing high school football after this weekend. For the remaining 60% or so, the goal of capturing a state championship gets real. Welcome to the Week 11 edition of the ETSN.fm podcast. I am Clint Buckley, and I'm joined as always by Mike Graham. Mike, can you believe it's the final week of the regular season?
Yeah, considering the math that we had to do this week to figure out some of these situations we're going into, I can totally believe it. But it is this season has flown by.
I refuse to believe it's already playoff time. I mean, the calendar says November, but it's like 70 degrees outside. What's the deal? I don't believe. I guess I'll believe it when I see it, which will be next week. So, there's 1 week left, and I guess we better comb over some of the playoff scenarios that still remain this week. A lot of teams have already clinched, but there are some still playoff berths that are up for grabs this week. And I guess we'll start with the biggest school in the region, and that's Tyler Lee. And as it pertains to the District 11 6A race, Lee could have done themselves a favor last week by scoring an upset win over Rockwall. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It was pretty rough for them. What was it, 41-7 at halftime?
No, it was 39-7, I think.
Okay, well, regardless, things did not go well for Lee last week against Rockwall, and it makes their job of making the playoffs a little bit tougher this week. First things first, they obviously need to win against Naaman Forest, which is very doable. Naaman Forest is 0-9 this year. I think Rockwall beat them 78-0 a few weeks back. That game is currently scheduled for Thursday, but as we record this late Wednesday afternoon, there are storms still forecasted for Thursday, and that could ultimately push that game back to Friday, which would make sense on more than one front. I mean, Lee just played Saturday. There's not another game going on at Rose Stadium in Tyler Friday. So it would make sense to push it back.
Right. You want to give yourself the best chance to win in the playoffs, and I feel like most teams this week want to play on Friday. That way everyone goes into the playoffs with the same amount of rest, regardless of whether you play on a Thursday night, a Friday night, or on Saturday.
Unless there's something we don't know about. Maybe, Lee's potential first-round playoff opponent is dead set on playing on Thursday next week. Maybe that's why they want to hold on to playing Thursday this week so they can have, normal rest and normal practice routine heading into next week. But the job's not done with a win over Naaman Forest. Lee still needs some help. They need Rockwall to beat Garland, which seems likely. Rockwall, you saw them first person last week. They're really good.
They're good, and they're already the district champions. So they've got a proven body of work, and Garland's kind of a team that I guess is kind of disappointed this season.
Yeah, I mean, they're about where I thought they'd be. I mean, they're right there in the mix with Garland and Saxe and Lee, which is basically what the final playoff spot came down to last year between those three teams, the final two playoff spots, and that's the same scenario we see this year. A little bit different. So Lee needs to win against Naaman Forest. Then they need Rockwall to defeat Garland, which is likely. But the real key will be Saxe's game against Rowlett. Saxe must beat Rowlett to kind of complete this parlay for Lee in order to make the playoffs. They need to beat Naaman Forest, they need Rockwall to beat Garland, and they need Saxe to beat Rowlett. If that happens, Lee and Garland would be alone tied for the final playoff spot, tied for fourth place in District 11 6A at 4-3. And Lee would obviously hold a head-to-head tiebreaker against Garland. That crazy comeback they had a few weeks ago where they outscored Garland 23-0 and wound up winning, I think, 51-47. I believe that was Zach Hall's first game back from injury. So we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, I think, on the podcast about how that could potentially be a huge turning point in Lee's season. And it certainly could be if all the cards fall into place this week.
Yeah, exactly right. And I can see this happening. Obviously, the tougher matchup's going to be Rowlett and Saxe, kind of the inverse of last season where Rowlett beat Saxe to allow Lee in. But I do believe that if Tyler Lee gets into the playoffs, they'll be facing Hewitt Midway in the first round again. And the rules changed over this offseason where the higher-seeded 6A team gets to host the game at their home stadium. And while the two teams met in Baylor and Hewitt's only 10 miles away from Waco,
right.
That's a challenge in and of itself.
Yeah, but I think you would think that Lee would go into that game potentially. Now, we're not saying that that's going to happen. Lee obviously still has to have several things go in their favor this week, but if it were to happen again, you would think that the way that their season ended last year kind of would have stuck with them. And what was it, 78-47, and it really wasn't that close. It was over pretty much early in the second quarter for Lee that week and the first round of the playoffs last year. So it's going to be tough, obviously, if Lee were to make it in the first round of the playoffs with that defense. We thought that their defense might be on the right track. After that little mini 3-game winning streak that they were on. But as we saw last week, they were no match for a Rockwall team that just pretty much did whatever they wanted to on offense. So, but despite that horrible feeling I'm sure that those kids had on the way back to Tyler Saturday, they still have playoff life, and it still can happen just as it did for them last year. They just need a similar set of circumstances to occur once again. So Lee is still in it, but they do need some help. Now on to District 15-5A. Really, the only thing left to figure out here is seeding in Division I, because the playoff teams have already been the playoff spots have already been secured out of this district. Longview, Texas High, Marshall, and Hallsville are already all in. Really, the only thing that needs to be decided is Division I seeding between Longview and Texas High. Going into Friday, both Longview and Texas High are 5-1 in district play. Longview has the head-to-head tiebreaker over Texas High. So either a Longview win over Hallsville or a Texas High loss to Mount Pleasant, don't laugh, would ensure Longview getting into the playoffs as the Division I seed, or as the number 1 seed in Division I, and that would line them up against Lufkin again in the first round of the playoffs. And Texas High would play John Tyler once again, rematches from last year's first round of the playoffs. But if Hallsville were to pull off an upset against Longview, or Mount Pleasant were to, and Texas High were to take care of business against Mount Pleasant, Texas High would get the 1 seed. They would play Lufkin, and then John Tyler would play Longview. And I saw something on Twitter last week that potentially, if John Tyler faces Longview in the first round, that game could be in Shreveport. Now, this wouldn't be unprecedented for Longview. They played Mesquite Horn, I believe, in the playoffs a few years ago. Over in Shreveport because they couldn't agree on a neutral site. And King has shown that, he's not afraid to leave the state in order to prove a point or just make things rougher on another coach that's being difficult to work with.
Yeah, visit an ATM if that game comes to fruition. I think that Longview is going to win and Texas High is going to win. We'll get the same matchups as last season. And I'll tell you what, there are no good matchups for any of the 4 teams. There's not a team you'd like to face in the first round. I mean, I think that's the best by-district pairing maybe in the entire state. These teams are stacked. So that'll definitely be a lot of fun to watch next week, regardless of who in 15-5A gets the Division I number 1 seed and the number 2 seed.
Right, and in a Division II in that district, the seeding's already been decided. Marshall will be the 1 seed in Division II from 15-5A, and Hallsville will be the number 2 seed. And there's a lot to figure out this week in 16-5A to determine who Marshall and Hallsville's first-round opponents are going to be. 16-5A right now it's a mess. It doesn't look like that from just the it doesn't look like that because you've got JT, Lufkin, and Ennis that have already clinched playoff spots. Those 3 teams are already in. So there's really only 1 spot left, but it's down to 3 teams, and really. A lot of stuff needs to happen for all 3 of these teams or one of these 3 teams to make the playoffs. And I guess we'll go one by one. We'll start with Corsicana. In order for them to make it, they either need a win over Ennis, or a Nacogdoches loss to John Tyler, or a Lindell loss to White House. If any of those 3 scenarios occur, Corsicana locks down the number 4 seed, or the fourth place spot in District 16-5A. And they would obviously be a Division II representative with John Tyler and Lufkin already sewing up Division I spots, just based on enrollment. For Nacogdoches to make it, They need a win over John Tyler, not going to be easy, and a Corsicana loss to Ennis, and a Lindale loss to White House. So Nacogdoches is up against it. They need to beat the district champion, John Tyler, 5-0 in district right now, or is it 5-0 or 6-0? 6-0 in district right now. And then they need Ennis to beat Corsicana, which is likely. I think Ennis is a favorite going into that game. But then they also need Lindale to lose to a White House team that is in the cellar in 16-5A at 0-6. So Nacogdoches needs a lot of help. And it starts with them pulling off a huge upset against John Tyler.
And they haven't beat John Tyler since 1989, have a 32-3-1 record against the Lions all time. So not only are they facing a challenge schematically, but also historically. But
I will say this, though. When was the last time Nacogdoches has been in this situation for 3 straight years? It's been a while. So with Bobby Reyes as head coach, they've done a lot of things in that program that haven't been done in a long time. So, but still, it's awfully daunting, the challenge that awaits Nacogdoches this week. And then the last team, how about the Lindale Eagles? I tweeted it out, I believe, last Thursday night after their loss to Ennis. It's hard not to feel compassion for Lindale, just based on the last 3 weeks and how the last 3 games have gone for Lindale. You start off with their game at Lufkin. It's a tight game all the way through. I think Lindale had leads at multiple times during that game. It was on the road against a very good Lufkin team, and it comes down to a potential game-winning field goal late in the game that's missed.
Hit the upright.
And Lufkin survives. They beat Lindale that night 28-27. The following week, Lindale returns home to face Nacogdoches. Tight game all the way through. Neither team had a huge level of separation throughout the entirety of the game. But late in the game, Nacogdoches, they score a touchdown. They're down 24-17. They score a touchdown. I believe there's maybe a minute left or a little more than a minute left to play. But instead of going for the tie and potentially sending the game into overtime, Bobby Reyes elects to go for 2. And of course, they get the 2-point conversion. So Lindale suffers back-to-back heartbreaking defeats. They lose that one 25-24. And then last week may have taken the cake. They're up in Ennis. They're already facing huge odds. No East Texas team has beaten Ennis at home on the field. Lufkin beat them by virtue of a coin flip, but no East Texas team since Ennis has been in this district had gone to Ennis and beaten them in their home stadium. And a low-scoring game. I mean, it was 7-3 Ennis for the longest time. And then Lindale scores a touchdown right at the either right at the end of the third quarter or the very first play of the fourth quarter. They take a 10-7 lead. It stays that way all the way until the final few seconds. And then when 3 seconds left to play, Ennis, of all things, throw a game-winning touchdown pass.
And they can't throw.
No, they can't. They have had struggles all year throwing the football. 3 seconds left. They throw a 20-yard touchdown pass to win the game 14-10. Despite all of that, Lindale is probably in the best situation out of all of these 3 teams.
Yeah, you're right. I rank these situations. 1, Lindale needs Nacogdoches to lose to John Tyler and Corsicana to lose to Ennis. Ennis has had Corsicana's number, and they're pretty big rivals.
And they also need to beat White House.
Right. They need to beat White House, who hasn't won a district game.
Right.
And wouldn't that be the greatest irony? White House needed a win against Lindale to have a slim chance at the playoffs, and Lindale, already dead,
beats them in overtime.
Yeah,
in White House.
So I could see something interesting like that happening, but I would put Lindale as the team with the best percentage to get out of the regular season among the 3 teams.
And who would have thought all the way back in the very first week of district play that their 19-7 win over Corsicana would be as big as it is. It just goes to show you, especially in a district like this in 16-5A, every game, every week matters, because when you get down to situations like this, it can come down to the narrowest of margins. And if there is a 3-way tie between Lindale, Nacogdoches, and Corsicana at 3 and 4 in the district, which it seems likely that's going to happen. You just went over the scenarios. Lindale beats White House, Ennis beats Corsicana, John Tyler beats Nacogdoches. All 3 of those teams are 3 and 4 for that last playoff spot. And because of point differential And because of that 12-point win over Corsicana and only a 1-point loss to Nacogdoches, Lindale gets in based on point differential. So, see, that's what's great about high school football to me. People will always talk about how, well, back when we played, it was so much tougher to make the playoffs and this and that. And you got 4 teams. You got over half of some districts making the playoffs. But, I mean, we wouldn't even be talking about this, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like soccer, European soccer on the final week of the regular season where teams are figuring out how to avoid relegation, getting sent down to the league for finishing in the bottom 3 of a league, and people are celebrating 2-1 losses because on goal differential they get to remain in the league and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun, and it's something unique to high school football. You don't have this in college, and you don't really have it in the NFL, even though that they do have playoffs. So.
I was kind of half paying attention to you right there. Am I hearing you right? Did you just compare Texas high school football to European soccer?
I did, in terms of relegation and surviving and advancing.
I guess I won't hold that against you. We'll move on to District 9, 4A, Division 1. This is a very interesting district.
It's shocking. I mean, the where teams are right now is not where we had them to start the season.
And it really, it all stems from just a touchdown pass with 58 seconds left last week. We wouldn't even be talking about this on the podcast had not Chapel Hill rallied from a fourth quarter deficit. They get their quarterback, Connor Hitchcock, back, who had not played because of injury since week 1. And, they got off to a 1-5 start, Chapel Hill did. And things were looking bleak, especially after they lose to Brownsboro at the beginning of district play. We're all like, okay, that's done. That was before we knew Brownsboro was the real deal, because they followed that up with a win over Henderson. But going back to last week, that game was virtually an elimination game. It's not set in stone that Chapel Hill is the 4th playoff team from that district. We should mention that the 3 teams that have already qualified for the playoffs in 9-4A D1 are Kilgore, Carthage, and Brownsboro. Now, for Chapel Hill to make it, they need either a win over Carthage, could happen, not likely, or a Henderson loss to Kilgore, which seems likely. Kilgore is undefeated in district, although that is a rivalry game, and I think Kilgore knocked off Henderson in last year's season finale after Henderson had already kind of wrapped up the district title. But they also would get in if Brownsboro just beats Palestine. And Palestine has had one of those years. It hasn't been good for them. They have a first-year coach, and I'm confident that, in the long term, if he's given enough time, he can help turn things around in Palestine, because they're a prideful program. They've had a long history of good athletes, but this has not been the year for them. They're 1-8, and they haven't won a district game. They're 0-4. They've gotten blown out by pretty much every team they've played this year. So for Brownsboro to lose to Palestine, that might be the shocker of the year if that were to happen. So that's all Chapel Hill needs. They either need a win over Carthage, or a Henderson loss to Kilgore, or a Brownsboro win over Palestine, and they're in the playoffs. Now, for Henderson, it gets a little tricky. In order for them to make the playoffs, they need to beat Kilgore, and they need Chapel Hill to lose to Carthage, and they need Palestine to beat Brownsboro. So it's going to be awfully difficult for Henderson to get into the playoffs. They need a lot of unlikely things to happen. But if it does happen, you would have a 3-way tie involving Brownsboro, Chapel Hill, and Henderson, all at 2 and 3. Brownsboro is in regardless because they have beaten both Chapel Hill and Henderson and are plus in point differential. Now, Henderson and Chapel Hill are both minus on point differential, but because Henderson only lost to Chapel Hill by 1 and only lost to Brownsboro by 6, they're at a cumulative -7. Chapel Hill, however, lost by 15 points or 14 points to Brownsboro and then only beat Henderson by 1. So they would be at -14 or -13. So they would be behind Henderson. So Henderson would get that 4th playoff spot in that scenario. But again, very unlikely. We expect the 4 playoff teams to be Kilgore, Carthage, Brownsboro, and Chapel Hill. And if that happens, obviously Kilgore would be the 1 seed from that division, Carthage the 2 seed, and then Brownsboro 3, Chapel Hill 4. And I tell you what, don't look now, but if Chapel Hill were to somehow go over to Carthage and win, pull an upset, just kind of keep the playoff destiny in their own hands and win, just think about what kind of confidence that'll do for them moving forward, especially with their quarterback back.
Yeah, you saw Chapel Hill kind of meander through the regular season last year and then made a really nice run in the playoffs, and I think they're kind of in store for that again. They've got a good team, and they're getting back to full health, and they strung together some good wins, or a good win recently. I think it's just kind of be a repeat of last year.
Well, one more district we want to hit on real quickly, and it's pretty simple. It's pretty cut and dry. It's 8-3A Division II. There are 3 teams that have already qualified, and those being Wascom, West Rusk, and Winona. Congratulations to Winona for getting into the playoffs. That hasn't happened very much of late in that program's history. And then the last playoff spot comes down to a head-to-head meeting Friday night between Frankston and ARP. It's in ARP. The winner gets in, and the loser season is done.
It's a playoff game.
Yep.
It's playoffs before the playoffs.
Yep. So that's going to be interesting to watch Frankston and ARP.
They match up really well against each other, too, because they kind of approach offense in completely different ways. Frankston's just going to air raid it over you, and ARP's going to be a little bit more meticulous with Casey Medlock and some good runners behind him, Julian Herndon. Lots of good stuff. I think that's going to be a close one because ARP is going to limit Frankston's opportunities to create big plays.
And how neat would that be if Frankston were to get in and Mike Owens, the legendary coach in East Texas who had all that success with Tyler Lee, won a state championship a few years ago, if he were to lead that team into the playoffs in his first year, that would be an interesting story for sure. So Frankston and ARP kicking off 7:30 Friday in ARP, a lot on the line. It should be a lot of fun. The intensity should be at a season high for both teams, considering that you're right, this is a playoff game. Now, the winner moves on, and the losers, it's basketball season. So, real quick, we want to give a shout-out to our Dairy Queen Offensive and Defensive Players of the Week. On offense, how about Case Robinson, the Crockett quarterback? 18 of 19, 371 yards, 5 touchdowns. And he ran for a 48-yard touchdown, all in the first half of a 61-16 win over Hemphill. I tell you what, Crockett, people are talking about how Newton's kind of rejuvenated after the struggle that they've had at the beginning of the year, similar to last year for Newton. But Crockett almost won that game. I mean, it was 38-35 when they met in district. Crockett could be a team to watch out for once the 3A Division II playoffs get started next week.
Yeah, they probably have the most explosive offense in Region 3 of that area. So, you got Lucky Daniels and A.J. Phillips as receivers. They're heck of players. You could see them doing some special things in the playoffs, especially early, lighting up some unsuspecting teams.
Well, the defensive player of the week is Brazos Heskew, the linebacker from Canton.
Yeah, Brazos, he won the award against the same team last year. This year, with Canton facing a 16-0 deficit in the first half, through the game, he recorded 19 tackles, including 4 for loss, and the Canton defense bowed up and held Reigns to 70 yards, while its offense scored 27 points for a win, and that win puts them in a tie for second place with Bullard, and they could finish this thing in the top half of their district thanks to that performance. Yeah,
so congratulations to our players of the week, Case Robinson of Crockett and Brazos Heskew of Canton. Well, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the podcast. For more information about this week's games, please visit ETSN.fm. If you have any questions for either Mike and I, you know the drill. Twitter, I'm at Clint Buckley, and Mike is at Mike_ETSN. Good luck to all of the teams fighting for playoff spots this week, and we'll be back 1 week from now when we'll be discussing the first round of the playoffs and making our state championship predictions. Stay tuned.